applause. Again, they are a platinum sponsor today, and they were responsible for getting Dr. Bilo here. So we gave you the short invitation or short introduction earlier today, but I'm going to do the official introduction of Dr. Bilo now. Dr. Fred Bilo is a professor of crop physiology in the Department of Crop Sciences of the University of Illinois. He received his PhD from the University of Illinois in 1983 and has been in his current position since 1985. His research is focused on production factors related to high-yield corn and soybean. He has given numerous presentations at local, national, and international meetings and has received numerous awards for his teaching excellence. He is a fellow of the American Society of Agronomy. He has 3 daughters, and he and his wife live on a small farm just outside of Champaign-Urbana. Again, join me in welcoming Dr. Fred Bilo.
Hey, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. I know it's been a long day. I know it's hot in here. It's raining. Now, normally that would be money falling from the sky, and I'd take credit for that, but maybe you've had too much rain. I'm not sure. Thanks a lot to Winfield United for sponsoring me here today. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to talk about corn today. But again, you know me, I like to ask you a few quiz questions. So I have an important quiz question where I'm going to test your knowledge. And the question is, I'm testing your knowledge on agriculture and politics. I mean, you know how hard it is to separate politics from agriculture. And so the question is, which crop does President Trump like better? Does President Trump like corn or soybean? I'm here to tell you there's one crop he definitely likes better than the other. Anybody know the answer to this? Which is President Trump's favorite crop? Well, I have empirical photographic evidence, and I can tell you with certainty that it's corn. and that's why I'm talking about corn here. That was why soybean was earlier. So President Trump definitely likes corn. So I got another question for you. This is similar to what I asked you about soybean. And the question is, what's the world record corn yield? And again, what's known as the corn yield gap. So world record corn yield, by the way, set last year. And the world record corn yield is 542.2740. Honest to God, they carry it out to 10,000ths of a bushel. I don't think they got the significant digit lesson in science class because I'll say that's damn close to 542. That's a world record. That was Dave Hula out of Virginia. So I had the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Hula at Commodity Classic. And I asked Mr. Hula when he was harvesting that 542, how high did he see the yield monitor go? And he told me he saw 630 on the yield monitor. So I don't think we're done with world records. By the way, this last year, 2017, in the U.S., that was a U.S. average record, 177 bushels. That'd be a crop failure in my state, and it would be a record yield in this state, but that was the U.S. average. And that's the yield gap again. The difference between the record yield and the average yield, 365 bushels. That is the opportunity to increase corn yield with better management. Now, I'll tell you where that record comes from. It comes out of the U.S. National Corn Growers Yield Contest. And you know how the U.S. National Corn Growers Yield Contest works? They have 6 categories. They divide the state up into A and AA categories based on the amount of corn. I think you're an A state. And then they have irrigated, non-irrigated, and conservation tillage and all that. But there's 6 categories, 3 winners in each category, 18 national winners. And if you can win that yield contest, man, you're a mini celebrity. Last year, in order to be one of the 18 national winners, you had to top 300 bushels. All 18 of them topped 300 bushels. There was 5 of them that topped 400, and there was actually 3 of them that topped 500 bushels. So I'm going to show you a top 10 list. I'm going to show you a top 10 list of the top 10 winners in last year's U.S. National Corn Growers Contest. And here it is. Here's the top 10 winners. when I look at this list, there's a few things that strike me. Okay, I'm struck about the high yields, of course. But then when I also look at this list, I'm pretty sure some of these people are related. I mean, it's just a wild guess, but apparently winning the corn contest is a touch on the incestuous side. I'm also struck by where these winners come from. I mean, Virginia, Georgia, South Carolina, honestly? I mean, these aren't places that I typically associate with high-yield corn. I mean, now the good news is last year there was at least 2 in the top 10 from the I-states, from Indiana. Now, I'm happy to say that of the 18 national winners, there were 6 of them from the I-states. So here's the I-state winners. And by the way, this 386, that's a non-irrigated world record. Nobody's grown 400 bushels yet non-irrigated, but it's right around the corner, I'll guarantee you. So here's the I-state winners. By the way, there's a glaring omission to this list. Can anybody spot the glaring omission to the list of I-state winners? Where are the Illinois winners? There wasn't any Illinois winners. By the way, there hasn't been an Illinois, there's only been 1 Illinois winner in the last 5 years. It was 2014. We snuck out of 3rd place. Now, there's only been 1 North Carolina winner in the last 5 years, too, so we're in the same category. Why aren't there any Illinois winners? I know the reason, and it's not because I'm doing a lousy job. So why aren't there any Illinois winners? Well, the reason is that Illinois is a blue state surrounded by red states, and so the problem is Democrats. Not a doubt in my mind about it. It's Chicago Democrats are the problem. I mean, I learned recently you could blame Democrats for anything. Doesn't even have to be true. I mean, so, but I know it's Democrats. I'm not sure what your problem is, but our problem is Democrats. I can tell you for certain. If we could just get rid of Chicago, we'd be Indiana or Iowa and be in way better shape. So the problem is either Democrats or maybe it's clouds. I'm not sure. But I'm sticking with the Democrats. So, you know, if you talk to these guys that win the contest, they won't tell you all their secrets. Well, they will if you pay them enough money. But there is a common denominator to win in the U.S. National Corn Growers Contest, and it looks like this. It all starts with plant nutrition. What they all do is they feed and protect a much higher density of the best hybrids. That world record that Mr. Hula grew, that was 53,500 plants per acre. So they feed and protect a higher density of the best hybrids, and anybody that wins the contest will tell you the plant can never have a bad day. No stress. I mean, apparently stress decreases yield. Who would have thought? But I have a slightly different view of what it's going to take to grow high yields, and it's what I call intelligent intensification. So I'm in the education game, and the intelligence is allegedly what you're going to get here. And the intensification is all those fine genetics and products, particularly from Winfield United, and some of the other vendors here, in the right place at the right time. Now, if I want high yield, I want to know those factors that each year have a big impact on corn yield, and I want to get them right, and that's my so-called 7 wonders of the corn yield world. This is my top 7 list of those factors that each year can have a positive, and the bad news is if you're unlucky or not intelligent enough, sometimes these can have a negative impact on corn yield. So I know some of you have heard this before. I mean, I've milked this puppy to death. But I've learned in my teaching that sadly students sometimes forget it the first, second, third, or even 4th time you try and teach it to them. So if you've heard it before, I hope it's good review. I'm going to go through each one of these wonders. I'm going to be able to give each of these wonders an average bushel per acre value. Of course, recognize that average is an average of a range, and I do my work in one of those nefarious I-states, so it might be a little different here. I'll go through each of these wonders. I'll justify some of them with some actual data, and then I'll show you how knowing this allows us to put together a systems approach in our quest to close the corn yield gap. Now, before I get into this, again, there are some prerequisites. There's some table stakes. some things you have to have in place first. And I don't mean they're not important. Just like I told you for soybean, they're crucial. I mean, my state would be a festering swamp if it wasn't for tile drainage. And I'm telling you, the tile guy is my best friend. Well, until he sends me the bill. Weeds don't add yield, by the way. I'd rather not have any weeds. Did you know that there are honestly people that believe mixed communities of plants are more productive than monoculture? I call them ecologists. Or maybe they're cover crop specialists, I'm not sure. I have not figured this cover crop craze out yet. What I really haven't figured out is why my winter annual weed is not a cover crop. But I think it has something to do with the fact that I didn't pay for the seed. And then I'm going to harp on this last one a little bit. You know how we base our soil fertility? It's based on a soil test. And the soil test tells you what you need to add and the yield what you need to replace. And that's worked fairly well for the last 50 years. So I'll assume you have those prerequisites. And then what are the top 7 factors that impact corn yield? Once again, I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. Now, I've worked on corn long enough that I can tell you the order they fall in. I can give each one of these an average value. You already know the factor that has the biggest impact on corn yield. Again, it's Mother Nature. By the way, here's the good news when it comes to weather. When any of my grand agronomic schemes or designs don't work, I just blame the weather. And it's often correct. Once again, much as I'd like to plant early and be done with it, early planting is not one of the 7 wonders of the corn yield world because it is influenced by the weather. I'll tell you what I do in my state to get different weather. And I'm going to give you a little preview of where I do our research. So here's our research sites in Illinois. Illinois is a long state from north to south. So University of Illinois is located near Champaign. But we also have research sites in the south in Harrisburg and one in Yorkville. Now, and so this is all the data I'm going to show you has been done at these 3 sites. I mean, there's no actual photographic evidence of me being at the other sites, but I swear I was there. It's just, oddly enough, no one had a cell phone to document that. So if you look at Illinois, I mean, there's soil down in Harrisburg somewhere. I'm not sure where they're hiding it. But if you look in Illinois, it varies quite a bit from the north to the south. And so I'll give you a little snippet of what it looks like. What I've done is shown you some average soil analysis as we go from the north to the south. So notice as you go from the north, Yorkville in the north, Harrisburg in the south, see how the organic matter goes down, the CEC goes down, the general fertility goes down. I mean, so this is how we do our research. Usually, not always, but usually yields are better in Yorkville than Champaign and better in Champaign than Harrisburg. Of course, it all depends on the weather. One of the ways that we try to remove variation in our research among these sites is we use the same equipment. So we use the same equipment. We bring the equipment to these sites. So when we're going to go to an outlying site, it's like a parade. So here we are. I think we are. Yeah, there we are. We're ready to go to one of our other sites. Here's some of my equipment. I mean, we're loaded up and ready to go. I mean, I got a semi-truck. There's my banding toolbar I'm going to show you, my Kubota. I got my planting tractor. I got my sprayer. We do all our own spraying. And this semi-truck has these sweet boxes. We can bring seed, fertilizer. I mean, we're going to go to an outlying site. We bring everything with us. We even bring this important piece of equipment. Wait for it. There it is. We bring this with us because we discovered if you plug that coffee maker into the 12-volt outlet of this 450 truck, it'll spark, smoke, start a fire. You'll be getting a new 450 truck. So now we bring the generator to power that important piece of equipment. All right, well, weather's number 1. What's number 2? Little delay here. There we go. What's number 2? This is allegedly the factor under your control that has the biggest impact on your corn yield, and that's your nitrogen fertilizer management. Number 2. Now, it's a little misnomer to say it's under your control, because here's a nuance of all of these wonders. They all interact with each other. And as a general rule, the higher you are on this list, the more control you exert over the wonders below you. I want you to think about weather and nitrogen. I'm going to ask you another question. And the question is, does weather impact nitrogen availability? By the way, you don't have any business being in farming if you don't know the answer to this one. Every single thing about nitrogen is influenced by the weather. Can we apply it? Is it available? Is it lost? That's an example of a weather-nitrogen interaction. So I'll show you another example, a photographic example of a weather-nitrogen interaction. This is some weather-induced nitrogen loss. Anybody ever seen this? I mean, I know it doesn't show up very well, but I can spot the weather-induced nitrogen loss in a picture there. Now, I have another question when it comes to weather-induced nitrogen loss. When I have weather-induced nitrogen loss, when nitrogen moves in the soil, the question is, does it move predominantly vertically? By the way, vertical is the scientific term for down. Does it move vertically or horizontally to the side? Which way does nitrogen move in the soil? It moves down. Or it might move up into the atmosphere, which is also, by the way, vertical. So nitrogen doesn't move sideways, it moves down. And because of this, I can see a nitrogen deficiency right to the row. So this is an example here. This field got 180 pounds of pre-plant N, and then there was, 10 inches of rain in June, had some downward movement of nitrogen. I think you can see the deficiency here on this one. This row here got an extra 80 pounds of N as a side drop using a Y drop. Dr. Henniger talked about a Y drop. I mean, this is sheer genius. I mean, you know what a Y drop is? It's designed to put the nitrogen right there. That's where I'm pretty sure the root is. Now, think about it. If nitrogen moves down and not sideways, where would the better place to put it be? There or there? I mean, this makes sense to me. Now, by the way, I don't actually have a Y-drop rig. Those things are pretty expensive. But I do have a research Y-drop rig. I got a research one-row Y-drop rig. There it is. And I'm happy to say there is no diesel fuel whatsoever required to power this rig. This sucker's powered by one graduate student. I mean, you actually have to feed the grad student, and you're better off if they don't have too much beer before they operate the rig. But so again, there's two advantages to the Y-drop. One of them takes advantage of the fact that nitrogen moves down and not sideways. The other advantage is the architecture of corn plants are such that they act like funnels. So the corn plant, she'll take 1/10 of an inch of rain, funnel it to 3 or 4/10 down the stem. Sometimes they'll even funnel a heavy dew. I know you've seen that. I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but this is after a heavy dew. Now, by the way, if water's going to funnel there, and nitrogen moves down and not sideways, and that's where the root is, where do you think the better place to put it would be? So I have a photographic example to show you some of the different ways of how to place it. And I mean, you can broadcast it, you can put it down the center of the row, there's the Y-drop. And I don't have time to show you all the data, but when we've needed a side dress, we get about a 10 bushel advantage from putting it next to the row than down the middle of the row. Now, putting it down the middle of the row is better than not at all. But if you can place it where the root is, there's even more of an advantage. All right, so moving on, what's number 3? The most important decision you make every year. And that is your hybrid selection. Oh boy, all hybrids aren't created equal. And all hybrids in a seed brand aren't equal either. You know, typically when I screen commercial hybrids, I see at least a 50 bushel difference between the highest and lowest hybrid. How big do you think that difference was in 2017? So what I'm going to show you 44 commercial hybrids that we screened at each of these 3 sites. There's 7 different seed brands, including my favorite, Cropland. And these hybrids ranged in yield or maturity from 104 to 118. That's the range you could do in Illinois. And this is what I call a variety testing trial. It's not official, so it's not an official variety testing trial like Ryan does. But, I mean, you're still allowed to do variety testing trials even if they're not official. 44 commercial hybrids, right? You know how you do a variety testing trial. It's what I call a beauty contest for corn hybrids. because you grow the plants at a relatively low stand and you really load up on the end. I mean, I can't have you drive by our variety testing trial and see it be nitrogen deficient out the windshield of the truck, right? So I put on extra N. What I'm going to show you is the range in yield among these 44 commercial hybrids as I go from the south to the north. So same hybrids, I'm showing you the range in yield. And so I'll start in Harrisburg, and I'll show you the range in yield among these 44 commercial hybrids. So I've listed the hybrids according to the range, and I've left the names of the hybrids out to protect the innocent, you know, which are largely these guys. But this data is on my website, so if you want to know the names of these hybrids, you could look at them. What I basically want to show you is that, man, that's a 60 bushel difference between the highest and lowest. That's a pretty important decision. Now, this is in Harrisburg. If I go north into Champaign, where conditions usually get a little better, now I have a 95 bushel difference between the highest and lowest yielding hybrids. And by the way, these are all double or triple stack, smart stack. You know, they're the leading stuff. 95 bushel difference. And then finally, if I go to Yorkville, now the difference is 123 bushels. In general, what I see is the higher the yield potential for a given site, the greater the difference among the hybrids. The more important it is to have the right hybrid. Now, people ask me all the time, you know, how do I know it's the best hybrid? And you're not going to like the answer. You're not going to like my answer. There's two qualities I typically see that's the best hybrid. Usually, it's the fullest relative maturity for the region. Again, I think it has something to do with use in the season. Nobody would grow a 118-day hybrid in Yorkville, but guess what? That's 118. Happens to be a cropland one. And then there's 117. I mean, usually it's the fullest relative maturity for the region. That's one thing. And the second thing is it's usually the newest and most expensive one. Again, I hate to tell you, you know, do you honestly think the seed company would release a hybrid if it didn't have 5 bushels more yield potential than the one it replaced? And do you think they wouldn't price it accordingly? You know, they call it price to value, which is a nice way of saying I'm gouging you for every cent I could get. Usually, the best ones are the newest and most expensive. I can't tell you how many guys I hear say, well, you know, I've worked the same hybrid for 4 years. It's performed pretty well. I'm going to use it again. Okay. You know, I get it $20 a bag cheaper. Okay. Guess what? 4 years ago, it was over here. 4 years later, it's over here. I mean, hate to say it, that's the breeding industry that develops genetics so fast. All right, well, moving on. What about number 4? So this is a tricky one for you guys. I know it, because you have varied agriculture. I saw some of it driving out here. I saw something I think I could smoke, and it wasn't marijuana when I was driving out here. So if you come to Illinois, you see 2 crops, corn and soybean. I mean, I thought I saw some wheat once, but it could have been a cover crop. I'm not sure. So number 4 in Illinois is previous crop. That is whether the previous crop is corn or soybean. Now, by the way, this is one that can go both ways, up or down. If soybean was the previous crop to your corn scores a 25 bushel yield increase. You don't have to do anything. It's like a tax credit. But if corn was the previous crop, it's the other way around. It's a penalty. Continuous corn yield penalty, on average 25 bushels. And contrary to popular belief, the continuous corn yield penalty does not go away with time as you stick with it, and some sort of magic equilibration in the soil allegedly occurs that I'm pretty sure somehow involves earthworms. I mean, I can't tell you how many consultants I hear say, if you stick with it, the continuous corn yield penalty will go away. That's not what I see. I'm going to show you 2 fields that progress 7 years into continuous corn. I'm going to show you the size of the continuous corn yield penalty. So I got 2 fields here. This is the continuous corn yield penalty, years of continuous corn. And I want you to notice, on average, it's 25 bushels. But it doesn't go away with time. It gets worse with time. Why? Why does it get worse with time? It has to do with what the cause of the continuous corn yield penalty is. What's the cause of the continuous corn yield penalty? It's the residue. You know, I got a picture here. We're blocked here by this fantastic ear demonstration, but this says 7th year continuous corn. And this is right next to a corn-soybean rotation. And you know, after 7 years of continuous corn, you got a fair amount of residue. You know, and that residue, boy, it acts like a sponge. It will prevent small rains from infiltrating. It will immobilize key nutrients, particularly nitrogen and sulfur. And if you have a dry July, that residue will release allelochemicals that interfere with the growth of the corn crop. It's the residue. I mean, the corn plant doesn't like to live in the dead, decomposing bodies of the previous crop, and you know, I hardly blame it. It's the residue. Here's the good news. If you're 10 years into continuous corn, as bad as it's going to get, you might as well stick with it. I mean, that's the good news. If you're in continuous corn, it's all about managing the residue. If you remove the residue, feed it to an animal, and replace it as manure, that's cheating. If every now and then you bury the dead with some sort of illegal tillage tool, it's a temporary fix. I'm here to tell you it's all about managing the residue. Now, I don't have time to show it to you all, but this is what, and I wanted to say, this is the same hybrid planted on the same day. Picture taken on the same day. Same amount of nitrogen. See, I can see the deficiency here and not there. That's the residue tying up that nitrogen. So if you're in continuous corn, or if you're in high yield systems, it's all about managing the residue. So a couple of things we look at. We look at chopping the residue right off the combine head. We have 2 combine heads. One of them is standard John Deere stock rollers on it, so you can see these big chunks. One of them chops it up. If we do this in the fall, this is worth about 8 bushels. We've also looked at managing the residue with additives. You know, with some nitrogen, with some of Loveland's products, extract by Accomplish with some humic acids, and that also helps. That can be another 10 bushels. So if you are in continuous corn, it's all about managing the residue. And by the way, if you're in continuous corn and you got the wrong hybrid and not enough nitrogen and the wrong weather, oh man, you're in a world of hurt. It's all about one of these interactions. What's number 5? Here's the hint. This is the seed company's favorite one. I mean, the seed company likes number 3, but they really like number 5. You know, if I sell seed, man, seed in the ground make the world go round. And so number 5 is plant population. Plant population, plant density, seeding rate, plant stand, I don't care what you call it, it's plants per unit area. And this is one that can also go both ways, up or down. But most growers I know give up yield because they're not planting enough seed. I know why they're not planting enough seed. It has something to do with its high cost. And then they say, well, what if I have all that expensive seed out there and I have bad weather? Well, yeah, but this is the factor that has to change in order to grow high yields. And I'm going to guess this is the factor that's changed the most in your farming career. I'm going to show you the average yield of corn in the U.S. over the last 55 years. And then I'll superimpose over that the average planting density grown in the U.S. over that same time period. So what I'm showing you here, I'm showing you the average yield of corn in the U.S. over the last 55 years. That's still in orange, Illini orange, by the way. And I want you to notice that the average yield of corn in the U.S. goes up and down depending on that year's weather. Here's a few weather fiascos. But overall, the average yield of the corn in the U.S. goes up about 2 bushels per acre per year. And associated with that increase in yield has been a linear increase in the number of plants planted. That's the blue line. Notice the blue line is not jagged like yield because you actually have to plant the plants before you know what the weather's going to do to impact the yield. I want you to hearken back to 1965. In 1965, the average yield of corn in the U.S. was 70 bushels, planting under 20,000 plants per acre. Probably a 36-inch row. Who knows, maybe some hills. And now, 50 years later, the average yield's more than doubled, and the average planting density in the U.S. last year was just under 32,000 plants per acre. And guess what? It's only going to go up. Despite the high seed cost, it has to go up. One of the reasons the plant population is so important to corn yield is it is a component of corn yield. Just like I showed you for soybean, you can make corn yield into a math equation by multiplying the 3 yield components together. So corn yield is a product function of how many plants you have per acre, how many kernels are in each plant, and the weight of each individual kernel. And once again, an increase or decrease in any of these can be responsible for an increase and decrease in yield, and these act at different times in the growth and the life of the plant. Plants per acre, that's planting and emergence. Kernels per plant, that's flowering. Weight per kernel is during grain filling. Now, any one of these can increase yield. You can change any one of these and increase yield. Sitting here today, which one of these components do you have the most control over? There's only one that you have any control over. I mean, plants per acre. You actually have to buy the seed, of course. I mean, and you can manage the crop or to try and protect its health and get heavier kernels. But the yield component you have the most control over is plants per acre. And that's the reason why if you look at the change in plants per acre over time, it goes up a little under 400 plants per acre per year. Increases. Now I'm going to make a long story short. I don't have time to go into all this, but I'm going to make a long story short, and I'm going to tell you that the maximum plant density, the maximum population you can legitimately get away with in a 30-inch row is 38,000 plants per acre. 38,000 plants per acre is top end for a 30-inch row. I mean, the answer is it depends. Depends on the weather, it depends on the hybrid, it depends on luck. I think God has something to do with it. But what I see is 38,000 is the top end for a 30-inch row. Now, again, I did the math. If the U.S. has a 32,000 plants per acre today, it goes up 400 plants per acre per year. In 15 years, the U.S. will be at the maximum density for a 30-inch row. I mean, some of you will be there higher. We'll be there higher in my state. 15 years, we're going to be at the maximum density for a 30-inch row. And that means the future of corn has to be narrow rows. I think it's 20-inch rows. By the way, if I'm John Deere, I can't wait for this to happen soon enough. Or if I sell seed, I can't wait for this to happen soon enough either, you know. So I'm showing you one of my research plots here, 44,000 plants per acre. The 44 is hidden here, apologize. 44,000 plants per acre in a 30-inch row, same number of plants in a 20-inch row. I think the future of corn is going to be 20-inch rows. And everything I tell you about 20s is true of 15s too. I can't plant 15s with a 4-row planter. So there's 2 advantages of 20-inch rows, of narrow rows. Same number of plants. By narrowing those rows, you can intercept more early light. All right, just look at the picture and tell me which side is intercepting more light. Is it A or B? Which one more light? A, B, B, A, which one's better? By the way, if you don't get this right, I'm playing eye doctor here. B, A. If you don't get this right, you better go see the eye doctor. It's clearly B. By spacing those plants out, I can intercept more early light. And I'm pretty sure that agriculture has something to do with light interception. I think that's the whole premise behind the whole deal. So not only can I intercept more early light, but I can also manage a higher density of plants. 44,000 plants per acre in a 20-inch row, they're all 4.8 inches apart. Too close. 44,000 in a 7.1-inch plant, in a 20-inch row, they're all 7.1 inches apart. You can manage a higher density of plants. The future of corn is narrow rows. Now, I'm not telling I don't know if some of you are going to be doing it. I mean, some of you look pretty old to me. But your kid or their kid, I'll guarantee you'll be in narrow rows in order to manage a higher density of plants. And I'll show you a little bit of our narrow row data, but this is worth about 15 bushels, is what we see when we narrow the row spacing, including in southern Illinois. I mean, probably including North Carolina. All right, well, moving on. What about number 6? This is like religion to some people. If they do it, when they do it, and it isn't procreation, it's tillage or no tillage. All right, think about tillage or no tillage. It's all about trying to control one of the wonders above it. You know, if I got a cold, wet spring, I love that black tilled soil. It warms up faster. I can plant earlier. You know, if I'm in continuous corn, I till the crap out of it to manage the residue. But if it turns out dry in July, I wish I had more water-saving no-till. So tillage is all about controlling one of the wonders above it. And then number 7 is a catch-all I call growth regulators. I'm going to put biologicals and biostimulants in this category. Growth regulators, biologicals, biostimulants. Next new thing in ag. And I'm going to tell you that this category actually got its start from the stay green, the leaf health or leaf performance that often comes from a strobilurine fungicide, even in the absence of visual leaf disease. So you know how this story goes, right? I fly a fungicide on, usually the second week of July. It's like a fine mist over the top of the crop. If I'm not out there watching them do it, I have to take it on faith they actually did it to the right field. But then 50 days later, the lower leaves show up greener. Actually, the whole plant's greener, but where you can really see it is the lower leaves. And since the lower leaves feed the stalk and the root, this can have a huge improvement in standability and harvest speed. And since the leaves are the business end of the plant, this can give me heavier kernels and an increase in yield, even when I don't have any visual leaf disease. I mean, this is heresy to my plant pathology colleagues, but there is a growth regulator effect of the strobilurine fungicides that can increase yield when there isn't any visual leaf disease. By the way, if you have leaf disease, it's even better. A lot of debate on what causes this. But I'm going to tell you that strobilurine fungicides act as anti-ethylene agents. Ethylene is a senescent hormone in the plant. And so I'm going to tell you this stay green is an ethylene-induced change in the senescence trajectory of the leaf. And hopefully that's scientific sounding enough to put it in the growth regulator category. Come on, baby. Yeah. Next new thing in ag. Here's the reason why. This is the only category that you can have more than one of and get more than one 10-bushel increase in yield. In other words, I might have something in furrow or something on the seed and get 10. And then I'd come back later at flowering and get it and spray something and get another 10. That would be 20. There's no other category other than this one that you can have multiple ones of and get multiple increases in yield. The next new thing. But be warned. This category has the widest range. All right, even though I'm giving it a 10-bushel increase in yield, it has the widest range. And you can actually decrease yield if you use the wrong growth regulator or biological in the wrong weather on the wrong hybrid. I'm going to give you a plant physiology lesson of the plant response to any legitimate plant growth regulator. So the plant response to any legitimate plant growth regulator follows what I call the Goldilocks rule. You remember the children's fairy tale, Goldilocks and the Three Bears? It had something to do with porridge. I don't know what porridge is, but I think it's oatmeal. And then I don't know what role the bears played either, but remember the porridge was too hot, too cold, just right? Well, the plant response to a plant growth regulator also follows the Goldilocks rule. Too much, too little, just right. Okay, when it comes to a plant growth regulator or biological, sometimes, so what I'm showing you here is the level of the plant growth regulator as a function of growth or yield. Sometimes it's that the plant doesn't have enough of the product of the regulator. Sometimes it's the sensitivity. So in other words, if I have a plant that has too little of the plant growth regulator and I add it, that's the right way. But guess what? If the plant already has the right amount and I add it, it's the wrong way. Sometimes plants are too sensitive. They're too sensitive to their environment. I mean, this is like my wife. So if she's too sensitive and I can make her less sensitive, boy, that's the right way. But if she's just sensitive enough and I make her less sensitive, oh boy, is that the wrong way. The plant response to any legitimate plant growth regulator follows this Goldilocks rule. If a little's good, a lot isn't better. You can decrease yield if you use a wrong growth regulator or biological in the wrong weather. And I'm going to show you an example. I'll show you an example where we made a growth regulator misapplication and it had a fairly serious decrease in yield. So this is an ear abnormality from a growth regulator misapplication. I'm not going to tell you what the growth regulator was because I don't want to jeopardize my funding source. But I will say it is absolutely not a Winfield United product. So I'll go out on that limb there. I mean, suffice to say that this plant growth regulator had a fairly serious negative impact on yield. Now, there's a silver lining to this story. Did you know that the Ohio State University has a collection of abnormal ears? Honest to God, Ohio State works on abnormal ears. Personally, I think they should be working on normal ears, but who am I to say? I mean, so Ohio State works on abnormal ears. They got a museum there. And the good news is, if you look, this one is not on the list. And so I brought one of these to Ohio State. They were really excited about it. You know, they said, what's the name of this new ear abnormality? So if you find a new ear abnormality, you get to name it. So I brought this to Ohio State. I said, well, the name of it is obviously penis ear. I mean, seriously, just look at it. And so they said, well, that name's a little too salacious. Can you come up with another name? I said, okay, how about pecker ear? You know, I was thinking about the woodpecker, but they're not bird lovers at Ohio State, so that didn't work either. And so then I said, well, let's call it Johnson ear. And they said, is Johnson a person? And I said, yes. It's a famous DeKalb plant breeder named Dick Johnson. I probably should have used Richard, because that didn't work either. And so the new name of this ear abnormality is circumovulated ear. I kind of think I pulled one over on Ohio State. But my point being, you can decrease yield with a growth regulator. You got to be careful about them. Now here's how the story goes. If you got good weather and you've optimized each of the other wonders, you should be able to grow 260 bushels, which, by the way, is routine in Illinois. And by the same token, if one of these is non-optimized, you're going to grow less than that. I think this is what your problem is. All right, 260 bushels. Good yield, but it's barely half the record yield. So how are you going to use this concept to grow more than 260? Remember, I told you all these 7 things interact with each other. This is what vexes you every year. I mean, think if you had 7 kids, how many fights and alliances they could get into. But think of how fantastic it would be if all 7 got together and worked for a common cause, your farming. Apparently, that's how we used to farm before we had all this big machinery. That's a positive interaction. So you must optimize each of these and their positive interactions, and you're going to need better prerequisites. I know you're going to need better weed control. But by the way, today's high-yield genetics is not selected to be tolerant to weeds. I'm pretty sure it's the other way around. But the prerequisite I'm going to talk about is plant nutrition. And I'm going to ask you another question. Okay, when were soil test values calibrated to corn yields? What year were soil test values calibrated to corn yields? Anybody know? In the 60s and early 70s, more than 50 years ago. Still use them today. Now, is there anything different about how we produce corn now than there was in the 60s and early 70s? Well, I remind you of one of them I just showed you. We're planting more and more plants. By the way, that is when soil test data was calibrated to corn yield, 60s and early 70s. 70 bushel average yield, 20,000 plants. Now the yield's more than doubled, 32,000 plants. We got germplasm that can grow 500 bushels, 50,000 plants. I'm just wondering. So plant density's gone up. I have another question for you. As the plant density goes up, what happens to the size of each plant's root system? So if I have more plants, what happens to the size of the root system? Does it get bigger, smaller, stay the same? I mean, this is an easy one. It gets smaller. I have photographic evidence of this. I mean, this is my graduate students' favorite task. I mean, Ron, they love digging up roots, man. They can't get enough of it. They dig roots up all day. I mean, so they love digging roots. I got a picture here. Here we are digging roots. I mean, we're actually using a shovel to do it here. Sometimes we got a potato digger if the soil's just right. But there we're shoveling them up. Man, talk about a sweet pressure washing setup. I got 4 pressure washers, these tanks. Man, could I pressure wash your combine. And talk about loving it. The students can't get enough of it. This is absolute sheer happiness when it comes down to digging roots. They can't get enough of it. And so I have photographic evidence to show you that as you increase the density of plants, the root system is distinctly smaller. So here's the size of the root system at 32,000 plants per acre. There's the size of the root system at 44,000 plants per acre. And I want you to notice it's distinctly smaller. I have a theory. This is what us professor types do. We come up with these learned theories. And my theory is that mineral nutrients enter the plant through the root. Pretty sure I can prove that theory. And as I have a smaller root system because I'm planting more plants, guess what? Placement of nutrients is going to be way more important. Facetious as I am, because of this, I'm not convinced that the soil test is calibrated to today's high-yield genetics. It was calibrated in the 60s and 70s. We're planting more plants than ever before with smaller roots. We got germplasm that can grow 500 bushels. It just makes me wonder. So you know how we base our soil fertility. It's mostly based on a soil test. Well, nitrogen's mostly based on expected yield. I mean, mostly you say, well, I'm going to grow so many bushels, I'm going to put a pound of N on. I don't know what, I'm not sure how it's done here, but I know there's all kinds of programs that tell you how much nitrogen you can use. Some of them take weather into account. You know, nobody actually uses them, but they're out there. And then P and K is based on a soil test. This is a feed the soil approach. I think the future of corn has to be feed the plant approach. It has to be designed to feed the plant what it needs, when it needs it, using technology to do so. Right? Technology is the solution to all problems. I'm going to use biotechnology, below ground insect protection. I'm going to use application technology. Now with my auto steer, I can know right where I put the fertilizer. I can remember. And then I'm going to use fertilizer technologies. Fertilizers that supply more than one key nutrient and or that have additives that either prevent that nutrient from being tied up or assist the plant in absorbing it. Technology to feed the plant what it needs when it needs it. Now, I don't have a clue what it takes to grow 500 bushel corn, but I can tell you exactly what it takes to grow 230 because we've measured it. Once again, my favorite 6 elements, this is similar to what I showed you for soybean. These are my favorite 6 elements required to grow 230 bushel corn. So here's the amount the crop has to suck up over the course of the growing season, fertilizer and soil. Again, here's the amount that's removed with the grain. That's like fertilizer maintenance. And then remember, I taught you the harvest index. So the harvest index is of the amount the crop sucks up, what percentage is removed with the grain. Now, when it comes to a mineral nutrient for corn, there's 3 criteria that I have for important mineral nutrient. And one of them is that the element has an interesting seasonal pattern of uptake over the course of the season. And that would be true of the micronutrient boron. Boron has a very interesting seasonal pattern of uptake. So I'm going to show you the interesting seasonal pattern of uptake. So again, what I'm showing you here, this is for 230 bushel corn. I'm showing you the uptake pattern and where it is in the plant of boron as a function of time for 230 bushels. So this is ounces per acre. It's ounces because it's a micronutrient. So I'm showing you the uptake pattern of boron where it is in the plant. And I said it had an interesting seasonal part. Can you spot the interesting part? Here's the seasonal pattern. Well, it's right there. Notice right there at flowering, notice how at flowering, the plant actually loses boron out of the leaf and the stem. Why? It's in the pollen. Boron is lost from the plant in the pollen. Boron's hugely important for pollen viability and silk growth. It's so important that the plant actually takes it out of the leaf and the stem to meet it. And boy, if you have stressful conditions, it's even worse. By the way, if you want to guarantee that your tissue test comes back deficient in boron, just measure it at flowering. It'll be low every time, I'll guarantee you, because the plant's losing it. That's interesting. All right, my other criteria for an important element is that the plant needs to accumulate a lot of it, and it needs to accumulate a lot of it in a short amount of time. And that would be true of both nitrogen and potassium. I'm going to use potassium. See, these are bigger numbers. I'm going to use potassium as my example. So I'm showing you the uptake pattern of potassium, 230 bushel corn, pounds K2O, function of time, where it is in the plant. I said it needed a lot of it, and it needed a lot of it in a short amount of time. So where's the sweet spot? It's right there. Between V It's between V10 and R1. That plant, a little heavy-handed with this. Come on, baby. There we go. That plant needs to take up more than 5 pounds K2O per acre per day, 21 straight days, usually the 3rd week of June, 2nd week of July. So that's a lot of it in a short amount of time. When the crop flowers, it has 85% of the potassium in it that it needs. And there's not much of it that's removed with the grain. By the way, that's why if you leave the stover, it helps the soybean, as I tried to tell you earlier. 85% of the potassium's in the crop at flowering. You say to me, well, I'm going to make a late side dress application of potassium at R3. Good luck with that. That's not when the plant needs it. Not going to work, I'm pretty sure. And my number 1 criteria for an important nutrient is high harvest index value. Again, if most of what the crop takes up ends up in the grain, and I want high grain yield, those elements with a high harvest index must be pretty important. And based on that criteria, my 4 favorite elements, the ones with the highest harvest index, are nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and zinc. Highest harvest index of all. Now, I'll show you 2 patterns here. I'll show you nitrogen and phosphorus. And by the way, nitrogen is one that fits 2 criteria. Not only does the plant need a lot of it, it needs a lot of it in a short amount of time, but it also has a high harvest index. So I'll show you the uptake pattern of nitrogen here, 230 bushel corn. Again, the same sweep spot, the same uptake period as potassium, V12 to R1, 7 pounds of N per acre per day. That's for 230 bushel corn. I don't know what it is for 500, but I'm pretty sure it's more. And guess what? If I don't take up my 7 today, I can't go back up and take 14 the next day. I just fall behind. That is, damn it. Sorry. Thought I had this worked out, but I obviously don't. That is not the time to be short of N, because you're making the business end of the plant, the leaf and the stem. Now, after that plant takes up 7 pounds of N per day for 21 straight days at flowering, it has 200 pounds of N in it. Come on, that's 75% of the total. You still got to take up 60 pounds after flowering. So you have to hold 60 back. But it's not enough to meet the needs of the grain. So see how the leaf and the stem, they cannibalize themselves to support the developing grain. And this screams limiting factor. And it is, after all, the second wonder. And it's even worse for phosphate. So here's the uptake pattern for nitrogen. Here's the uptake pattern for phosphorus. Come on, come on. There it is. And notice it is season long. Half of the phosphorus that corn needs has to be taken up after flowering. Half of it. And it has, by far, the highest harvest index of any of the elements. I want you to notice it has a harvest index of almost 80%. This is the element, at least in Illinois. I mean, we don't have chicken shit like you do. But at least in Illinois, this is the element that's most limiting corn yield, because we're relying on an adequate soil test, and we're planting more plants with smaller roots. Now, if I had my way, I'd have a fertilizer that has all these 6 elements in the same granule. Sadly, it doesn't exist. So my second choice would be to have these 4. I'd like to have nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and zinc in the same granule. That would be my idea of the right fertilizer source. And by the way, that's exactly what Mosaic's Micro Essentials SZ does. Micro Essentials SZ is MAP that has sulfur and zinc in the same granule. And some of that sulfur is fine ground elemental sulfur, so it serves to acidify the granule, keeps the phosphate and zinc more available. It's a slow-release sulfur source. And if I use 250 pounds of this, I have all the phosphorus, all the sulfur, all the zinc, and some of the N I need for 230 bushel corn. Now, there's other ways that you can supply those 4 elements. This is the way I do it. This isn't the only way. I'm using Mosaic's fertilizer because I get a lot of money from Mosaic, and they like it if I use their fertilizer. But there are other ways to do it. I want those 4 nutrients. My idea of the right place is to put that fertilizer directly below where the future crop row is going to be. And we have our hands on a research toolbar. Here's our research toolbar. And with this toolbar, we can band that fertilizer 4 to 6 inches deep directly under the row. You notice it has RTK, so I know where it is. If you look at the back of this sucker, it's a coulter. So this coulter's opening up a slit. We're blowing that fertilizer in, not all at the bottom, but and then we close it. So we know right where that band is, and then what we come back with our planter, and we plant right over the band. Wait for it. Try it again. Come on, baby. Thing is a zillion megabytes. I know that's the problem. Either that or this crappy pointer. There we go. Yeah, there's my research planter. And so what I'm doing, it also has RTK. I'm coming back, I'm planting right over that strip. This planter also has a real sweet starter setup on it. I can put different starter products, 3 different products at 2 rates on the go. But when I do that, when I plant right over that band, I see an enormous improvement in the early growth of the plant. So what I'm showing you here, here's where the toolbar ran through without the fertilizer. Here's where the toolbar ran through with the fertilizer. And this is a soil that has a P-test of 44 parts per million. I mean, maybe not for you, but that would be high by my standards. So the soil test says you don't need any, but I got a screaming improvement. And I see this every single time, regardless of the soil test. All right, if I plant it over that band, there's a screaming improvement. Now the question is, how close to the band does the row have to be? And the answer is pretty close. So I'll show you an example here. Come on. Yeah, different distances from the fertilizer band. 0's right over the band. UTC is none. Soil test says you don't need any phosphorus or sulfur. There's 6 inches from the band. You can see the difference. And sometimes this carries over all the way to yield. So I'm showing you here yield as a function of distance from the fertilizer band. This means broadcast. This is no fertilizer. So notice if you're right over the band, you're the best yield. If you're 3 inches from the band, you're pretty good. But if you're 6 inches from the band, if you're only 6 inches from the band, you're better off broadcasting the fertilizer. 6 inches. That's the width of the length of a dollar bill. I guess if you miss the band, it's the width of a $100 bill, but that's not very far. You got to be within 6 inches of the fertilizer band. Why? Well, it has to do with the horizontal spread of the root system. The horizontal spread of a normal corn's root system is only 6 inches. I mean, Ron has a few of them there. I measured them. It's only 6 inches. So if you dig up a root, this is a corn root, 32,000 plants per acre, near the end of the season. Here's the rulerometer again. It's 6 inches. Now, I know you see all kinds of marketing ads where they show you roots that are 5 foot deep and 3 foot across. I mean, that's called a tree. That's not a corn plant. Dig them up. They're only 6 inches. So by the way, if the fertilizer's right under the row, I'm okay. If it's 3 inches from the row, I'm okay. But if I'm out over here, better off broadcasting it. Now, if I look at this row, or I very often see this with starter fertilizer too. If I look at this non-starter row, if I look carefully at either of these rows, I see one of the biggest problems that it's lowering your productivity. And Ron talked about this a little bit. It's what I call a plant left behind. See this guy right here? He came up 2 or 3 days after his neighbor, and he's behind. So this is standard fertility, standard density. This guy's behind. And guess what? He'll never catch up to his neighbors. There's not a single thing you can do to this plant to make it catch up. I mean, you can try. You can go out and you can hug it. You can sing to it. You can sleep next to it. You can piss on it. I've tried it. Usually makes it a little worse. I will guarantee you that plant has a smaller ear than its neighbors. Lots of things cause that. Planting problems, seed problems. Maybe there's an ice cube under there. I don't know. But when I band that fertility under the row, even with 44,000 plants per acre, not only do I have way less plants left behind, but they grow faster. Young corn plants sense their fertility at an early age, and they make irrevocable growth decisions. Fertility sets the trajectory for corn yield. This is the same hybrid, planted on the same day, picture taken on the same day. You know, wow, which one do you think is better? I mean, there's no guarantee, but I'm betting on that one. Fertility sets the trajectory for corn yield. It's like turning the dimmer switch in yield all the way up. So based on all this and our 7 wonders, we have a suite of enhanced production factors that we've been testing over the last 6 years. So in other words, we enhance the fertility, got my favorite 6 nutrients. I had to use 2 fertilizers to do it. I have a base rate of N, and I side dress an extra 80 pounds of V6. Lately, I'm using a Y-drop. 44,000 plants per acre fungicide, and we've been comparing 20 and 30-inch rows. And what we've developed is what we call a high-technology system that we try to compare to a grower standard. So I know there's a lot of stuff here. Our standard practice is in orange, our high-tech practice, our systems approach is in blue. So on the standard side, we put the P and K in the fall based on the soil test. If the soil test said we didn't need it, we put none. 160 pounds of pre-plant N, urea or UAN, 32,000 plants per acre, no fungicide, 30-inch row spacing. That's our standard approach. Now, compared to that, on the high-tech side, regardless of what the soil test said, we used our favorite 6 elements. I show the amount there. Again, we banded the phosphorus, sulfur, and zinc. We used microessentials SC, and then we used another Mosaica product, which is potassium with boron on it, that we broadcast. We didn't ban the potassium or boron because those are either salty or toxic, so we broadcast them. Got my 6 favorite nutrients. Then on the high-tech side, in addition to that 160, I put another 80 side dress. I weatherproofed that with a urease inhibitor, so 240 total. 44,000 plants per acre, fungicide at R1, 20-inch row spacing. Now, I wouldn't be here today if not over 4 years, my 3 locations, so 12 site years, we didn't get a 47 bushel increase in yield. So there's the standard management, there's the high-tech. You can see there's more plants, but you can also see the plants are a little healthier. 44 bushels on average. Now, it is true that the value of the high-tech system over the standard differs according to that year's weather. So again, I'm showing you each year weather. I've averaged it over the 3 trials, north to south. I showed you the standard yield, the high-tech yield. This triangle is a scientific symbol. That means I subtracted the standard from the high-tech. You can check my math. 47 bushels on average. I mean, you can see it varies a little bit depending on the year. Now, here's the key question. If I have 5 factors that give me a 47 bushel increase in yield, are they all worth 10? Or are some factors worth more than the other? So this is 5 factors. This is like my basketball team of management. Who's LeBron James that I have to pay for regardless of cost? Or better yet, who's the slacker that I don't have to pay for? This is a very difficult statistical question. And in order to answer the question, who's the superstar and who's the slacker, we use a new rendition of an experimental design called an addition-omission plot. I know you hate experimental designs, but I'm a glutton for punishment, so I'm going to try and explain this to you. And if you don't understand this design, you won't understand the little bit of data I'm going to show you, so might as well take out your cell phone. Here's the design. 12 treatments. There's the full Monty. That's everything. In blue, there's the standard system in orange. And I'm going to hearken this to 2 basketball teams. So the blue is the pro team, the orange is the high school team. I'll assume the pro team beats the high school team. And then what I do, 1 player at a time, 1 factor at a time, is I replace a pro player with a high school player, and I see how badly that 1 high school player drags down the performance of these other 4 pro players. Hence the name omission plot. And I do that for every position. Then at the same time, I take 1 pro player and put him on the high school team, and I see how well 1 pro player elevates the performance of these other sucky high school players. And I do that for every position. This would be if you had 5 side-by-sides. And I'm telling you, this makes a fantastic visual demonstration in the field because you can see a huge difference in yield in a small area. I mean, this is a drone shot. It doesn't show up very well in this light, but I can see some of the greener ones. Now, I don't have time to go into all this, but what I'm going to show you is which 2 of these factors were the most valuable players over the last 4 years. So using this design, I'm going to show you which 2 of these were the most valuable over the last 4 years. And then I'm going to show you how much yield you would have gained if you used either of those 2 alone in a standard, or how much you would have lost if you left either of those 2 out of the high-tech system. I know this is complicated. So which 2 are the most valuable? How much would you gain if you used them alone in a standard, and what would you lost if you left them out? So, and I've shown this to you here. And again, I've averaged it over the 3 trials. I mean, it's true if you take one trial in a given year and location, stuff is different. So I've averaged it over the 3 locations. 3 different years, different weather. These are the 2 factors that were the most valuable. Doesn't mean they're the only valuable ones, but they win the 2 awards. That's how much yield I gained if I used one of those alone in the standard, and that's what I lost if I left one of those out of the high-tech package. Okay, there's a couple of things I want you to notice. Notice the cost of omitting a factor, the loss in yield from omitting a factor from the package is always greater than the gain of adding it alone. It's not what you do, it's what you don't do that kills you. I also want you to notice that on the standard side, there's not many single things you can do to increase yield. And sometimes you go the wrong way. I mean, if you look at population, here I got nothing, here I lose 6. Okay? See how these numbers are always smaller than these? The other common denominator I want you to notice, over the last 4 years, there's been a common denominator about the factors that have been the most valuable. Plant population, 20-inch rows, fertility. See how these keep cropping up? The most important factors over the last 4 years have all dealt with managing a higher density of plants, feeding them, spacing them. It's exactly what the winners of the corn growers contest do. Now I got one last thing I'm going to show you, and I'm going to show you this is what we did in 2013 through 16. In 17 and 18, we've tweaked the system to add in furrow. So now it's 6 factors instead of 5. It's a hockey team now instead of a basketball team. So everything else is the same, but what we did is we added in furrow. And so what we did is in furrow we did a fairly aggressive rate of 10-34 row with zinc. I'm sure this was a Winfield United zinc. That's the best. And then we compared that to no zinc, to nothing. So that's the only difference. And I'm telling you, you could see this in the field right to the row. I mean, right to the row. This is last year, beginning of June. There's the standard management. There's the high-tech. Man, if we were standing out here, we'd be going, this is pretty good-looking corn. That's because we don't have that right next to it. I mean, if I'm a betting man, you know, I'm going to bet this one out-yields that one. That's just a wild guess. Right to the row. So again, we use this additional mission design stuff. And on this one, I'll show you everything. So I'll show you, I'm going to go back, I hope. I'll show you which of these factors alone, which one alone gave you the best yield. So I'll show you the full design on the additional mission. And this is from last year. Again, I've averaged this over the sites. Damn it. So here's standard management, 228 bushels. And now I'm looking at adding 1 factor and only 1. So if I add that extra fertility, I gain 10 bushels. It's in the right direction. Pretty sure it wouldn't have paid for all that nutrient. If I added the starter, the 10-34 plus the zinc, I actually lost 10. Man, it looked great, but I lost 10. If I went to 44,000 plants per acre, I lost 8. Don't just raise the population alone. Bad move. If I went to 20-inch rows, I gained 11. So these are baby steps. I mean, at least some of them are in the right direction. Now I'll show you this side on the high-tech. And on the high-tech side, it was 61 bushels more. And now I'm looking at the cost of omitting a factor. So I left the fertility out, I lost 39. Interestingly enough, notice on a high-tech system, everything you leave out decreases yield. Leaving the starter out decreases yield. Only having 32,000 plants per acre, it's not enough plants, it decreases yield. Having a 30-inch row, man, whopping decrease in yield. So again, I'm summarizing these here to show you it's exactly what we've seen in the past. The cost of omitting a factor is always greater than the gain of adding it. That's the synergy. That's those factors working together. I hate to tell you, there's no one thing you're going to do to win the yield contest. Now, if you're doing something wrong, one thing can really help you. But when it comes to the next yield level, it's a systems approach because these things work together. And last year, just like my other years, you notice the most important factors are fertility, row spacing, with population being number 3. Again, it's exactly what the corn growers are doing. They're feeding and managing a higher density of plants. So I'm going to end here. I've gone through the 7 wonders thing. I hope knowing those factors that impact yield make you better managers. I've told you that corn yield starts with plant nutrition. sets the trajectory. If there's anything that's out of date with the genetic potential of today's hybrids, it's plant nutrition. I've showed you that increased yields are going to require more plants, but you're going to have to manage them. You're going to have narrow rows, better crop nutrition. I didn't say it, but you're going to have to also have the right hybrid, probably a cropland hybrid. And then I've shown you for maximum yield, a systems approach is needed that combines individual practices. And then I've also shown you that high yield doesn't happen by accident. You have to plan for it and carry through, because the factor that has the biggest impact depends on that year's weather. So I have to end. I mean, I got a big mouth, but I have virtually no equipment skill. But I do have an excellent team, so I have to end by showing you my research team. This is my research team this year. These are my students, technicians, undergraduates, interns. That's me right there. Notice my strategy here. I surround myself with 2 attractive females to make me look better and even a little taller. So I have to thank these kids. They do all the work. I also want to thank my farm cooperators. This is where I do my research. I use University of Illinois land at Champaign, but I rent land from farmers at the other sites. And by the way, the University of Illinois charges me to use their land. The University of Illinois charges me more than the farmers do, and they take the grain too, which isn't as good a deal, but you probably heard our state's broke, so the university really needs the money. And then finally, I want to thank each of these fine companies. These are the companies that have supported my research this last year. They've given me something: product, machinery, money, better yet, all 3. This is in alphabetical order, not in the order at which they funded it. And of course, I really want to shout out Winfield United, who's a major supporter of my research program in addition to sponsoring me here today. And I know some of these other companies have sponsored this event, so many thanks to that. Finally, special thanks to Rod. I got to thank Winfield United one more time. And then special thanks to Rod, who got me to come here. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. Somehow he got a hold of my cell phone number. Big mistake. But guy's relentless. And that's sort of why I'm here, Rod. I also want to thank 3B Farms, and there's another farm too, and the Blackland Farmers Association for hosting me. And if you're a glutton for punishment, that is my laboratory website that some of this information is on. The hybrid list is on, uptake patterns are there. If you like long, nasty web addresses, that's it. Or you can Google crop physiology laboratory. This will come right up. Not crop psychology, that's a way darker site. But if you do crop physiology, this will come right up. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. Thanks for hanging in there to the bitter and very end. I'm sticking around. I can't get home till tomorrow, so if you want to chat with me afterwards, I would be honored to do so. If by some miracle anybody in the audience has a question now, I'd be happy to answer that too. Anybody got a question? First question? Yes. Yep, the question is, I said the future of corn is narrow rows, and do I count twin rows as being a narrow row? I do. I also count 15s as being a narrow row. Everything that I would tell you about 20s is the same in 15s. I can't research 15 with a 4-row equipment because I got every other row's in a tire track. I can side shift the planter in a 20-inch row. So the question is twin rows. And I researched twin rows. God, I loved twin rows till I was jaded by failure. I never saw it coming. The problem with a twin row in my world, I was running a 7.5-inch twin on a 30-inch center, so 22.5 between the rows. And what happened to me, if you have a hot August night, the twin row holds temperature down the twin. I didn't show it to you here, but I got an infrared picture that shows it's 2 or 3 degrees hotter down the twin at night. Now, every night in August, that the temperature stays above 73 degrees Fahrenheit, you can kiss a bushel goodbye. And that twin row made more nights above 73, and I'd lose the lower leaves. Contrary to popular belief, when a twin row lodges, its twin doesn't hold it up. I mean, if you've ever harvested a lodged twin row, oh man, is that ugly. So I've seen fantastic twin rows in the north, in Canada and in Minnesota, but Illinois is too hot. I'm guessing North Carolina is. Now, if you're in twin rows, you better get the hybrid right. You better manage it right. So I've given up on it. Anybody got another question? That was a great question. I didn't set them up either. I said, the comment is, I said for every day in August that the temperature stays above 73 degrees at night, I meant to say night, kiss a bushel goodbye. Because here's the way the corn plant works. Makes sugars in the day in the leaf, puts them in the stem, and then it moves them from the stem to the ear at night. And if it's hot at night, it just respires them away. You lose it. 73 degrees is the cutoff. I mean, you know, it might be 74 or 72, but hot August nights kill you. That's one of the reasons that we don't win the national yield contest enough. Hot August nights. What's that? At night? Well, in the daytime, the plant can cool itself if it has water, because it can transpire. It can't cool itself at night. So night temperature is always the killer. It doesn't look like you like the answer to my question. Your question. Oh, yeah, it's killing you. Yeah, just roll over in your sleep and have nightmares about that. That's killing you. I mean, nothing I can do about it, you know. But high nighttime temperatures is not good when it comes to corn yield. Yes, sir. All right, the question is, what stage am I applying the fungicide? That's at VTR1. I've tried it at V6, makes the plant a little greener, I get nothing. But VTR1, one time. Other question? Again, I'm going to stick around, so if you have a super secret, sexy question you want to ask me personally, I'd be honored and happy to ask you. Again, pleasure to speak with you. You've been a fairly decent audience. Wait, one more question. All right, so the question is about my toolbar? Yeah, so my toolbar is a coulter that opens up the slit 4 to 6 inches deep. The fertilizer is inserted in the slit. It's not a shank, so it's not all at the bottom. Some of the fertilizer is in the seed furrow. So those are Dawn 6000 universal anhydrous knife is on my bar. So it's not all in the bottom. Some of it is in the seed furrow. How what? 4 to 6 inches deep. Man, you can put an enormous amount of MAP near the seed. It's not salty at all. It's the mop and the boron you got to be worried about. Well, again, thank you very much. I hope the rest of the season is great to you. Safe harvest. I hope you're productive. Again, great audience. Appreciate the time.